said it reflects in Talmudic literature a character of constantly growing sadness and asceticism. By the end of the 2nd century or the beginning of the 3rd, celebration of the day had lost much of its gloom. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who assembled the Mishnah, was in favor of abolishing it altogether or lessening its severity.
Okay, you know what? I think we should not replace the actual text with Wikipedia.
Okay, go ahead.
So, I mean, it's a Gemara in kindness. So I have it here. So it's interesting. Interesting what it gets connected to in terms of ritual, in terms of making it a religious event, and in the way it's used. It's the Talmud in Tanit says describes what happened. So 5 things happen on the 17th of Tammuz, and 5 things happen on Tisha B'Av, and the things that happen on Tisha B'Av. One is the sin of the spies.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the guys who went on Luke Ford's blog site and said bad things about Israel. No, that's what rabbis call people who do stuff like that. But
Troubler of Israel, isn't that what King Ahab called
the spies who
but he also didn't
knock the land of Israel?
But didn't King Ahab call Elijah the prophet a troubler of Israel?
Yes, but so getting back to the point, so they link the spies episode in the Book of Numbers to being that night, and we'll look at that text in a moment. The first bite is destroyed. The second bite is destroyed. Beitar, they attribute 2 things. Beitar was besieged, and then it was plowed over.
Yeah.
So we don't talk much about Beitar because the history, again, this is where it becomes modern. People like it when it looks like a mythic story.
Beitar was the headquarters of Bar Kokhba, right?
Yeah. Well, it was
the Bar Kokhba rebellion. It was the last stronghold of independent Jewish life in Israel until 20th century.
Correct. And with almost more catastrophic aftermath than the destruction of the Second Temple.
Right, because after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Romans didn't get in there and start regulating Jewish life in Israel. There was still Jewish life in Israel, and
quite active.
And they could have the academy at Yavna, and they could do their Jewish things. They could study Torah. But after the Bar Kokhba revolt, Romans said, "No more. You Jews, you're just too troublesome. You've revolted again. This is it. We're just going to plow you under. We're going to ship you away from the land. We're going to come down with our heel right on top of your face. We're going to grind you into the dust." And things were much more miserable for Jewish life in the land of Israel after the Bar Kokhba rebellion than after the destruction of the Second Temple.
Yeah, and then of course the center of Jewish life transfers to Iraq. Anyway, so that's the text, Wikipedia notwithstanding. The interesting thing is the tie-in to the. I think it's important to keep in mind. Again, the way that the rabbis read this is that they do create a mythic structure for it by tying it to the this episode of the spies. And it said that they cried for nothing, right? Because the spies told them false things about the land. They said it was too much trash, it was dirty. It's not the right place for Jews to live, is one of your...
Right. It's no place for a Jew.
They said stuff like that, and of course that was false. So they cried a false... So the Gemara says, they cried a false crying that night. So God would give them real things to cry about, which is a very interesting phrase right there. I think it's worth thinking about. But that's the story.
Now, what about the 19th century Hasidic masters and the Sfat Emet? You've read a lot about what the Sfat Emet had to say about Tisha B'Av the meaning that we ordinary mortals can
Well,
derive from.
I want to do one thing first, because we'll get there, because I think it's relevant. I think we have to, let's approach this in a manner that, because if we see what's being said about it, we can then understand where they're going with the readings, and it's not, they're not making stuff up. But it's very interesting. So, if you look at all the Talmudic references to the first, to the destruction of the first temple, which is primarily in the Gemara and Shabbos, there it's all religious in nature. First of all, they talk about the murder of Zechariah, and they killed a righteous prophet for bad reasons. They didn't like what he was saying. There's a lot of religious things that are given there.
Was Zechariah the only prophet that was murdered, put to death by Israelites in the biblical story?
That's the one that we're told. Look, Yirmiyahu gets thrown into a pit.
But he wasn't put to death in the biblical story.
No.
Yeah, okay.
So that was the first. Then the other. They said that they made fun of Talmidei Chachamim, that they didn't keep Shabbat. They play ball on Shabbat. It's one of the lines.
Whoa, a lot of people do that in P.K. Robertson. They love to play ball on Shabbat. Even rabbi sons.
Yeah. That was usually the big focus when I was in yeshiva as a kid.
I had a friend who resolved not to play basketball on Pesach, on a holy day of Pesach. So he stayed inside, and instead he met a girl and committed a far greater sin. So sometimes playing ball isn't the worst thing you can do on a holy day.
Yeah, that one is interesting. That the Gemara tells us that even happened on Yom Kippur in holy places. So that's a whole other the issues of passions and stuff like that. I think we might even come to that. There's a lot of stuff. Look, I mean, this is a central idea of Jewish theology. What happens here? This idea, because it gives us the whole. It boils down to a lot of questions of peoplehood, nationhood, why the Jews. This whole thing about this line about the Jewish problem that was current in the 19th century. It's a book I forgot to bring. I wanted to bring just to show you. I have this book from Germany of the Germans and Jewish problem. Like this kind of, you don't see that kind of dialogue anymore, but it used to be a very important thing. We forget. I mean, since we don't have this talk anymore because there's a state of Israel. So, but back in the day. So, whereas the first temple destruction is seen as for religious reasons, the second temple we have a whole different set of. And here already in the second temple, and certainly in the Beitar, we start getting into politics. And just to get you excited a little bit, interestingly, the Talmud is very leftist on these views. And in fact, I have a wonderful book by Yisrael Eldad, who was a right-wing leader in the early days after '67. And he writes a book against Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, condemning him for his actions in the Churban. And
for abandoning Jerusalem?
For abandoning Jerusalem, for the he defends the texts take on the extremists, take on the rebels. They're very negatively portrayed in every way. So, in fact, what happens is that when the siege started, so there's a lot of stories. And of course, there's the famous story again where religious extremism leads to the destruction of the temple. So it's
the second temple.
Yeah, no, we're talking about the second temple.
Yeah.
Now. The first one.
It was religious.
It says what it is. We have Yirmiyahu, we have the Book of Echa, we have all that. But so
the books of Jeremiah and Lamentations for those of you who only speak English.
We don't speak Yeshivish.
Don't speak Yeshivish. And also, there's not really a clear delineation between religious and political sin in Judaism as there is, say, in Christianity, where there's a notion of render unto Caesar that which is Caesar and unto God that which is God. In Judaism kind of subsumes all of life.
Well, I don't know. Let's see. I mean, that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
That may be the case because of this it's not.